Alright, so that's working, that's working, that's working. So long as my internet continues to work, this should be fine. So fingers crossed. Alright, we ready to do this? We're ready to do this. So we will make that go away. And we will get started. Hello, Shadowcat back. And today, I've actually been waiting for this this discussion for a while now, because I wanted to do this discussion last week. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to do it last week, so I've been sitting on this one for a while. And interestingly enough, I don't know if this is providence or fate, but apparently I'm not the only one who had this on their mind, because I wake up this morning, I find somebody else talking about kind of the same thing. But we'll get to that in a minute. So, what are we talking about today? Today I was inspired to talk about this after the news from earlier in the month. Now, this was kind of a lesser news story for those people who even talked about it at all. And even those people who did talk about it, it was a flash in the pan. They talked about it, it was news for a day, and then it was just gone. And, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I have tried to look up more information on this, and there is none. So the news article that I'm talking about today was the news from Panama. Not the city, the actual country. And in Panama, there was, to make the entire story very short, there was a climate protest. Apparently down in Panama, there is a Canadian company that wants to open up a copper mine there. And this is, of course, very unpopular with a certain segment of the population. And they took to the streets to protest. And when they took to the streets, I do mean so quite literally. They took to the streets, they brought in logs and branches and everything else to block the street while they held up all of their banners and everything else. They had backed up traffic for miles and miles and miles. And what happened was there was actually an American dual citizen lawyer who was stuck in the traffic jam, and after waiting for a while and nothing happening, he got out of his car, walked up to the protesters. There was a bit of a back and forth. What exactly was said is still under debate, but essentially he told them to leave, and they of course refused to leave because this is their activism. He pulled out a gun, and the protesters absolutely disregarded him and said, "What are you going to do? Shoot one of us?" And so he did. He shot one, dropped him on the spot, and as they were scattering, shot another one, wounded them fatally. They didn't die on the spot, however, as I understand it, they were dead by the time they got to the hospital. After that, he cleared the road, let traffic pass, and then waited for police to pick him up. And this news article, even though it was very brief, and no one's really talking about it now, it did actually stir up a rather large amount of conversation for obvious reasons. There were people who actually supported on both sides, both the protester side and the lawyer's side. With the obvious thing being, do you think it was right for him to shoot them? Do you think it was right for them to block the road in the first place? There was a lot of discussion to be had there, and we're going to get into that. But that's not the only thing that I wanted to talk about today, because I have spoken before about problems and symptoms, and that not all problems are themselves the root cause of what's going on. Sometimes the problem you're looking at is a symptom of something greater. My go-to example I like to use is diabetes. Now, you can look at somebody who has, say, had their foot cut off because of gangrene, and you say, well, what happened? It's like, oh, well, I had gangrene and they had to cut my foot off because of the damn diabetes. And it's like, okay, well, we're onto something here. You lost your foot because of diabetes. However, not all diabetes is genetic. Type 2 diabetes is generally more often the result of poor lifestyle. Usually a lack of exercise, a lack of activity, a lack of proper diet, usually an intentionally poor diet. And so when we look at this example, we say, what happened to your foot? We could actually remove the diabetes part right there in the middle and go right back to the actual root cause. Poor lifestyle. It was poor lifestyle that caused the problem in the first place. Similarly, when we look at this whole violence epidemic that we're seeing right now, especially in regards to protest, we could, of course, put the blame on protest. However, the actual root cause of what's going on goes far deeper than just people gathering in the streets and blocking traffic. And so that's going to be today's discussion. So before we get into that, I look over at the stream. I see that there's 3 people in here. Now, one of those is my other screen, so I can see that I'm actually live. So that means there's at least 2 people here besides me, and one of them is even in the chat. Hello, Malachi. Good morning. Glad to see you here. I don't know who else is here, but you should join us in the chat. It's fun. It's warm. There's cookies. Okay, there's actually no cookies. I ate them all. I apologize for that. But you should join us anyway. The chat is a good place to be. So, before we get into talking about the Panama lawyer thing. Oh, and before we get into that, Malachi says, school firearm discharges are also a good example. No more than 30-ish years ago, I can remember kids at high school having shotguns in their truck so they could hunt after school. No firearms issues. Yes, that is a wonderful example. It's not one that I was going to get in. However, if we wanted to expand this more broadly, almost the entire violence epidemic as a whole is merely a symptom of a larger cultural problem. And that cultural problem I am going to be getting into today. So while I'm not going to be covering the school shooting issue, and not just school shootings, but school shootings, nightclub shootings, bar shootings, any of this violence. We could even go so far as to say like the Tennessee shooter, who is very popular right now. It's all symptomatic of the larger problem. So really, you can take almost everything I'm about to say today and apply it just about as equally to what you're saying there. And I mean, there's a lot of things about school a long time ago that have changed. Another thing that strikes me is you also used to have things like smoking there. Why? Because you had high school kids who would smoke, and they had places for them to do so and everything else. Now they've gone through and they have gone with a zero tolerance policy. Absolutely no smoking, no drinking, no drugs of any kind on school property. And it's like, well, while I admire your intentions, has it actually done any good? Has it actually benefited anybody? Or, instead of treating this on like a cultural level and going with brute force, have you only created now a larger population of criminals? The same thing. Instead of going to the root of the problem and speaking to why people do things, you've just gone to what they do. Again, kind of just folds into everything else here. So, the first thing that I want to talk about is actually not the lawyer in Panama. And, I mean, he has a name. I should probably actually know what his name is. Let's see. Where's he at? I know it's in here somewhere. Or maybe they didn't name him. I thought they named him. Oh, there it is. Kenneth Darlington. And they call him the suspected shooter, but I mean, he's on camera. In fact, they got one of the most incredible shots where they got the gun actually firing, and the casing, the ejected casing, is in the frame. So, suspected with heavy air quotes. But we'll get to that. Instead, the first thing that I want to talk about is not this Kenneth Darlington. I actually want to talk about a man named Marvin Heemeyer. Heemeyer? I think it's Heemeyer. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. I should have paid more attention. Because the ironic thing is, when I wake up this morning, first thing I do, of course, turn to my phone, which is a bad habit. I'm not breaking it, though. I turn on my phone, I check the news, I check YouTube, I check things, and what do I see? I see the most popular man on YouTube. Let's bring it up. There we go. Mr. Simon Whistler. If you don't know him, I don't know how you don't know him, because he runs like 23 different YouTube channels. I don't know how he does it. Okay, I do know how he does it, but damn, he works a lot. Anyway, this is the first thing that I see, and as you can see on here, this was released 19 hours ago. So as I was writing my notes for this lecture, he releases this video on Marvin Heemeyer, the architect and driver of the Killdozer, which I thought was really funny. And honestly, you should go look at this video, okay? This video is all of 48 minutes long, so it's a little on the longer side. Unless you're like me and you like long-form content, in which case it's a little on the shorter side. But he goes into great detail about everything that happened from the Marvin Heemeyer point of view, from the point of view of the city and the city council and everybody else who was involved. And he covers everything in just fantastic detail. So if you want to know more, because I am not going to be going into detail when I talk about this, if you want to know more, I highly recommend that you go listen to his video. Not to mention, Simon is a treasure to listen to. If you like me, you'll like him. I will admit, I actually do try to emulate some of what he does in my own streams. He is a role model. And Malachi says, the Killdozer, God bless. You're familiar! And by the way, that response right there is what we're going to be getting into. Because God bless depends on really who you're, or which side you're on. Are you on Marvin Heemeyer's side, or are you on everyone else's side? This is where things are going to get muddy. So let's move on and actually discuss who he was and what he did. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and grab Wikipedia here because it's easy. We're not going to read the whole thing because the whole thing is kind of long and I don't want to. All I am going to say is he was an American automobile muffler repair shop owner who demolished several buildings with a modified bulldozer in Granby, Colorado. Okay. More to the point, to summarize the events of what went on, Marvin Heemeyer moved to Granby, Colorado, and he was looking to start a new business there. And so the first thing that he had to do is he had to procure for himself a new plot of land in which to build it. Obviously, if you want to build something, you got to have a place to build it first. So that's what he did. He went to property auctions, he waited for a piece of property that was large enough for him to use, and he bid on it. Now, he wasn't the only one bidding on it. As a matter of fact, part of what happened in this is one of the people that was bidding on it was another man, and I don't remember what his name was. I think it was like Cody or something like that. Doesn't matter. Anyway, one of the other people who lived in the town and who had high connections with like the city council and the founding families of Granby, Colorado, also wanted that piece of property. And Marvin outbid him. Okay? Didn't go as high as he had to, but he outbid him. He won the piece of property. And of course, the other guy was, admittedly kind of a sore loser about it. But eventually he had to let it go because he lost. Now that he had his piece of property, Now he could develop the piece of property and build his new business. And that's where everything went wrong. So first thing that happened is when he wanted to build it, he found out that, number one, the property had no sewer access. It's a municipal property, but it wasn't tied into anything. I think it had some kind of rudimentary underground septic system, but not a proper septic system, so it was completely unusable in that regard. And if you're going to develop a commercial property, it has to meet all the commercial codes. Ergo, he needed to bring the property up to code. The problem with this is, he had bought the property for something like $45,000, or somewhere in that area. When he went to the city council and said, I need to get this done because, this is a city project and needs to have the city workers come in to do it, they quoted him about $70,000 to come in and connect the property to the already existing sewage system. This, of course, was an enormous amount of money, and he was, of course, very much displeased because after dealing with the person he outbid, he thought that the price was being used to punish him. And so this started everything. This was really the straw that broke the camel's back and started the entire snowball rolling downhill. So he felt slighted over this, and of course he couldn't prove that they were doing this punitively, but he had every reason to believe that they were, and the city council already was not a fan of him, and so this started a fight over trying to get the septic installed. A fight that Marvin was going to lose because the city has absolute power, and they can't really do anything, or he can't do anything about that. Now, the city, to their credit, did suggest that he could, with a few modifications, have a septic system installed. He didn't want a septic system. He wanted to be added to the municipal sewer system, and he wanted it done at a fair price. Now, whether $70,000 is fair or not, I can't really say. I don't think it sounds fair, but then again, these things are always more expensive than you expect. So, there was that. Eventually, he did come around to doing this. However, by the time he came around to actually accepting the $70,000 to get it hooked up to the septic or the municipal septic system, that was no longer an option. The reason being, across the street from his property was another property. Now, he wasn't interested in this property, never had been. However, the person whom he had outbid for his property was interested in it. And he wanted to turn that into commercial property as well. In fact, he wanted to turn it into a cement plant. Now, the cement plant didn't thrill anybody. There was, of course, a residential neighborhood nearby who didn't want to see this. He didn't want to see it there. Nobody wanted the dust that was going to be generated. Nobody wanted the added traffic that would be generated, not to mention the noise pollution and everything else. However, after several concessions were made, he was finally allowed to own the property and develop it into a cement plant. This, of course, was, a great investment for him, but it did have the added benefit that now, because of the way the municipal system was made, I guess like the sewer system ran on that side of the road maybe, now, in order to get Marvin's property hooked up to the septic or the municipal sewer system, he needed the permission of the property across the street, which was of course now owned by the man whom he had outbid for his property, and who honestly did have it out for him. The reason we can say that for sure is because as soon as it was established that Marvin had to ask permission, the answer to that was no. In addition to that, not only was he refused permission to actually hook up to the municipal sewer, but the city council, because the property was not hooked up to the municipal sewer line, was found to be in violation of county code, and he was then being fined $100 a day. Every single day that his property was not hooked up to municipal sewer. which now put him in the position where he could literally do nothing about it except continue to be fined until he went bankrupt and the city repossessed the property. Now, eventually, he did hire a lawyer. They went back and forth on this, and he was put into a position where he could finally move forward, and the only way he could really move forward was to sell the property, which he didn't really want to do. And so he went to the city and made them offers, and every time the city accepted the offers, he said, "No, actually, I was just joking about that one. I'm coming back with a higher offer." Until he was actually asking $1 million for the property, which the city then told him to go sit and spin. And so, now with nothing else really left to his name and nothing else to do, he sold every single asset on the property except for a bulldozer. He then took a whole bunch of concrete, layered the entire bulldozer in a half-inch of solid steel, coated that solid steel in, I forget how much concrete it was, and then layered that concrete in another half-inch of steel, making it absolutely bulletproof. There is almost no gun on the planet that could shoot through that unless it was an actual cannon, which was the one thing the city did not have, which they found out very quickly when he decided to take it out. Because on the morning of June 4th, he got in his bulldozer, he sealed himself in. The hatch was specially built to lock itself from the outside as soon as it was closed. Once it was locked, he then went through, demolished the entire concrete plant. And actually, let's make sure that we get this right. Let's see. He drove it through the concrete plant, which was owned by the Dochev plant. At the time of the attack, Cody Dochev was at the plant, screening topsoil at the gravel pit when he got the notification. Let's see, where else? After the concrete plant, he went to Agate Avenue and South Town. Where did he go next? Right, he went to Town Hall, which had been hosting a story hour for children, and he went through that building too, absolutely demolishing Town Hall. Then he went to the Liberty Savings Bank, demolished them as well. And let's see, he went through several street fixtures. He went through the local offices of the newspaper. He turned to the homes of the Thompson family and their workplaces. They brought in a scraper to try and stop him, which was hilariously ineffective. This was, of course, a massive bulldozer, multiple tons already, then covered in steel and concrete, making it several tons heavier, and they brought in a scraper, which, if you've never seen a scraper before, it's like the skeleton of a big truck, because it's just really two big wheels and a big boom that goes between them and a scraper blade that hangs down in the middle. Yeah, it wasn't stopping anything. He targeted a propane storage yard. Then he went to a nearby power transformer, but he didn't actually hit that one. After that, let's see, they were thinking about calling other things, but more importantly, I think it was this one. He attacked the Gamble store, targeting it due to the owner's involvement in the hearings at the batch plant. However, this is where it stopped, because this place was actually just a hardware store. The owner just had, connections with the city council. What he didn't know is that there was a basement in it. So he drove the bulldozer into the building, and then the bulldozer tipped down into the basement, and it was rendered inoperable. Then he shot himself. Now, there is a lot to unpack in this that we are not going to get into. For starters, of course, we know what his side is, but if you ask what was it called? The Dochev family, what happened, they have their own take on it. If you ask the rest of the city council, they have their own take on it. And even if you listen to his own recordings, he talks about how God had put him in this position, and God had basically made him the martyr that he needed to be to pull this off. And so there are questions today over, was he even sane? Was he mentally unwell? Was he a man that was pushed to the breaking point and now he was in some kind of stress dementia? Or was he actually a man who just had a fervent belief and he had been screwed over by every single person around him and he was taking his revenge? We don't know, and we're never going to know. However, the entire events that unfolded here were incredibly divisive. And they were divisive because, as many people have pointed out, anybody who has had to deal with the government automatically feels a sense of connection and camaraderie with this man. There is a reason why most people recognize June 4th as Killdozer Day, and some people even elevate this man to sainthood. Because anybody who has had to deal with the government immediately knows what this feels like. And then, to have it go on for months to years at a time, to be absolutely left broke and destitute, and to know that there was actually a cabal of people who were doing this to him. He was not wrong when he believed that there was a conspiracy against him. Every single person who had hurt him had connections with each other, either with the founding families of Granby, Colorado, or with prominent institutions like the bank or the city council. He was not wrong that they were out to get him. However, they were not wrong that, he had been difficult to work with. It was an interesting case of nobody was right in this one, and so that's why most people fall down on both sides of it. There is always going to be people who see both sides and people who are going to take both sides of this one. But one of the most important things, and it is the title of this stream, and I wonder if I can find it in here. It was his quote. He says, "I was always willing to be reasonable until I had to be unreasonable," adding that sometimes reasonable men must do unreasonable things. And I wanted to talk about that because now we're going to get into the subject that I started today with, and that was the shooting in Panama. However, before we get to that, Malachi says, "I'm not saying that Heemeyer was right, but I can say I see how he went down the path he did, and I respect the conviction of purpose," which is exactly what I was just talking about. Anyone who's had to deal with the government before is just like, I get it. It was awful, yet awe-inspiring to see and learn about it. Again, yes, most people that saw this felt the same way. And he had CCTV feeds in the dozer to see with and everything. He had a lot more than that, actually. He had multiple cameras, every single one of them encased in, what did they call it? I think they called it Lexan. I think it's called Lexan. It's basically the same stuff they made the windows out of for the presidential motorcade. It is essentially bulletproof to anything less than 50 caliber. And it's even bullet resistant to 50 caliber. He also had food and water and ammunition and everything. The Killdozer had gun ports in it. He had a 50 cal, a 30-aught, I think, and a 22. And used all of them. Didn't actually shoot anybody, though. I mean, he did fire bullets, but he didn't shoot at anybody. And this is actually one of the biggest reasons. This is one of the biggest reasons why people elevate him to sainthood. For a man who, said that God had put him on this track, if you believe in God, you have to believe that God kept everyone else safe while he did this. He never shot anyone. He never ran anyone over. He hurt not a single person. Which actually is very, very interesting because, as a little bit of a tangent, I want to go ahead and compare this. This was in 2004. In 2020, we had the Summer of Love. And I discussed in my last stream a little bit of what BLM did back then. However, one of the rallying cries during the BLM marches is that it was only property. Okay? It's only property. It's only things. So don't get mad at BLM because no one's getting hurt. It's just buildings, okay? It's just merchandise. It's only things. Well, if we're going to be absolutely fair here, it was only things. It was a plant. It was a bank. It was town hall. But it was only things. It was only property. See, this is one of those wonderful occasions where you can literally take somebody's words and throw it back at them. Because if what happened during the Summer of Love was absolutely justifiable, then so was this. And if this was unjustifiable, so was that. And anything other than one of those two options is hypocrisy incarnate. And so it's a wonderful crystallizing moment. But I'm not going to go down that tangent any further. I just want to make sure that one was thrown out there. Besides, I mentioned BLM, so now YouTube can go ahead and bury this entire stream. So if you notice connection problems, there you go. Now you know who's doing it. It's not me. My internet connection is still good for the moment. So, now that we've covered that, let's get on to the subject that we opened up with. And that is this one. So it says a man shot 2 anti-mining protesters. Now again, I have tried to find more information on this one, and I can't. That may be because it's simply too new, and the information just hasn't come out yet, or maybe there just isn't any. He is likely being held in a jail somewhere, and maybe they haven't even done that much investigation. Maybe he still hasn't had his day in court. I don't know. So we'll have to wait and see. Oh, Malachi says, counterpoint, if I see you torching a Walmart, no I didn't. Now, if you're at the mom and pop gas station and they ran for their whole lives causing a ruckus, well, my pronouns are may and hem. That was actually funny. I like that. My pronouns are may and hem. I'm going to use that one. I'm stealing that one. I will find a place to use that one. So yeah, anyway, back to the lawyer. He's probably sitting in a jail. He probably hasn't had his day in court yet, so I don't have any more information. This is the best I can do, and this is from Friday, November 10th. We're not going to read this whole article. We are just going to grab the important parts, and that pretty much starts right here. So, protests have been underway for more than 3 weeks against the government's decision to sign a deal to restart the Central America's biggest open-pit copper mine for at least 20 more years. As part of the protests, a demonstration occupied a highway on Tuesday. Traffic started to build up, and according to reports, the suspected shooter, Kenneth Darlington, who was 77 years old, was one of the people who became stuck in their vehicle. The protests attracted a group of photographers, TV reporters, as these things often do, to the side of the traffic block where protesters had lined the middle of the highway with tires, flags, tree branches, and stones to stop cars. So they had basically set up a barricade. Not a very good barricade, but one that was inconvenient enough that you couldn't just drive over it. According to outlets, the suspected shooter was carrying out several errands that day when he was stopped by the protest. And then the infamous quote, "This ends here." Panama TV network TVN reported they were able to access the suspect's court hearing on Wednesday for a few minutes. I guess he has been to court. They said that in court, the prosecutor accused Mr. Darlington of allegedly telling his companion, "This ends here," before leaving his vehicle and storming up the highway towards the protesters. Widely circulated video footage shows Mr. Darlington arguing with a group of men from the protest. He allegedly asked who the leaders of the campaigners were, to which the men replied, "There were no leaders." Quote, "I don't want to talk to women, I want to talk to the men," he replied, according to TVN. While he was confronting the protesters, the suspect was accused of removing a handgun from his pocket as he started to remove the blockades from the road. Local outlets say one of the protesters can be heard saying in the footage, "Why don't you shoot?" while the others shouted, "Are you going to kill someone?" Mr. Darlington allegedly replied, "Do you want to be the first?" In the footage, two men in black shirts and one in a red shirt came over to talk to the suspect. The court reportedly heard that the three men had approached him to try and defuse the situation. And we will discuss that in a moment. Then there's the shooting. After arguing with protesters, video footage captured the moment. The moment. When the suspect allegedly lifted the gun and opened fire, hitting one man in the black t-shirt carrying a flag who immediately fell to the ground. I believe that was a heart shot. Mr. Darlington allegedly opened fire again, hitting another man who was also in a black shirt. I believe that was a shoulder shot. However, he must have hit a major blood vessel. Video showed him holding his shoulder in immense pain and staggering to the side of the road where he collapsed. Screams could be heard from other demonstrators and witnesses, with photographers capturing images of the shooting incident. The men shot have been identified as two teachers who died at the scene, and I'm not going to read their names because, honestly, it's not terribly important right now. "Yes, I killed one and shot another," he is quoted as saying. The shooter proceeded to remove the blockade out of the way with his gun still placed firmly in his hand, then returned to his car. As he was walking back, another person in the car asked him, "Are you aware of what has happened?" He said, "Yes, I killed one and shot another." He then got back in his car, turned to the woman, reported to be his girlfriend, and said, "Let's go." She allegedly said, "We're not leaving," before calling the police. Officers later stopped his car, seized his weapon, and handcuffed him and took him away, which you can see up here. And that's really all we need to know. All I really want to talk about is the event that happened, and primarily why it happened. So that is the series of events. And as with the case with Martin Heemeyer, I want to talk about the why. Specifically what Heemeyer said. Sometimes reasonable men must do unreasonable things. Now, this was very divisive, as was the case with Marvin Heemeyer. In the case of Marvin Heemeyer, of course, it was many people sympathizing with his plight against the government versus people who, see him as some kind of radical lunatic. And we actually have the same thing here, just the government's not involved. Instead, what we have are people who believe that he was a reasonable man who has just been pushed too far, versus people who believe that the right to protest is supreme and that protests are meant to be inconvenient. Again, this generated a lot of conversation during the as I don't understand it, very brief time that it was in the news. Of course, you have people who are on his side saying, yes, good job, you killed those protesters. It's about time somebody put them in their place. And on the other side, you say the right to peaceful protest is something that is acknowledged by pretty much every single United Nations member. I was going to say nation, but it's like, no, United Nations... Nations? No, actually that works. And that the use of violence against unarmed, non-violent protesters is absolutely uncalled for. And the problem here, of course, is there is an argument on both sides. The problem here is civility, empathy, and compassion. These are values and virtues that we as a Western civilization have strived to uphold. They are two things that are missing in both of these stories. Okay? Civility, empathy, and compassion. The reason why both of these stories happened is because of a lack of empathy and compassion. And without those, you don't really get civility. Just as a reminder, the first ever direct message that I did on my channel, and it should be in the playlist if you scroll all the way down to the bottom. Or is it all the way up to the top? I don't remember now. Either way, the very first one that I did, I talked about law. And I talked about what law is. Because we all know what laws are. Laws are the rules we have that are written down in a book. But as I stated in that lecture to, great extent, is that laws don't actually exist. You can put ink on a page, and ink on a page is just that. It has no power. It has no significance. It has meaning, but only meaning so far as people are willing to give it meaning. I believe the example that I use is if I were to outlaw the color purple tomorrow, and say that anybody who wears the color purple shall be deprived of all of their rights and be given the death penalty without charge or trial. Well, that is technically a law. However, if nobody abides by it, nobody enforces it, and nobody cares about it, is it really a law? In the end, at the end of the day, laws are only those things by which we all agree on, and we all agree to abide by and enforce. We can say that there is no law against wearing another color. However, if we all as a group agree that we're not going to tolerate anybody who wears the color purple, that we are going to arrest them, harass them, punish them every time they step out in a blue or a purple t-shirt, well, that is by default a law. Just because it's not written down doesn't mean that the consequences for it are any less real. And so we see here the same thing, kinda. This idea of civility is really an ethereal concept that immediately goes out the window as soon as we've agreed that we're no longer going to be civil with each other. Suddenly, your civilization is just a isation. And what is that? That's a nothing. And Malachi says, yeah, not really seeing the need for discharge in the Panama situation. Nonviolent protest and what amounts to a man being stuck in traffic. A lawyer to boot opens fire and expects it to be okay. That's what I'm actually going to talk about right now. See, civility going out the window is really the symptom to the problem. The problem that we're having here is empathy and compassion. Now, a lot of people are going to look and say, what he did, was that empathetic? Was that compassionate when he gunned down 2 people in cold blood? Well, no, it was not. I don't think anybody's going to argue that. The same thing is true with the Marvin Haymeyer situation. Is what he did empathetic and compassionate? No. it was not. But now let's turn things around. Was it empathetic and compassionate for the city to refuse to even negotiate on what it would cost to run a sewer line to this property? No, it was not. Buying the property across the street from his property, especially with, unprovably but ostensibly the reason just to harass him? No, it was not. And so we can see that a lack of empathy on one side begets a lack of empathy on the other side. A lack of compassion on one side begets a lack of compassion on the other side. I am going to bring up the Summer of Love again, because this is not the first time that we have seen protesters blocking traffic. We saw many protesters blocking traffic during the Summer of Love. It was actually kind of a daily occurrence in some places, where you could be driving and today this intersection has been shut down due to protests. Tomorrow it may be another one. 2 days ago it was on the other side of town. And so nobody knew where these quote-unquote protests were going to be. And the results were ugly. I should have actually pulled them up, because I don't have any of those pulled up now and I didn't think about it ahead of time. But people died. Cars would get stuck inside of these protests in the middle of streets, and the drivers and occupants would be dragged out and beaten. In other protests, a car would be surrounded and people would actually pull their guns and fire out the windows, killing the protesters just so they could get away. And in still others, the cars didn't stop at all, because when the car was surrounded, they would put their foot to the floor and simply run down anybody in front of them. Because they knew that if the car was stopped and people could get their hands on it, that either they were going to have to kill somebody to get out, or that the mob might actually kill them. We did this for more than a year. And we had not only casualties on both sides, we had people being arrested for being caught in these protests and trying to get out of them unharmed. This led to an incredible rise in tension with anybody who was participating in a protest, whether this was a legal protest or not. And many of these protests were not legal. They were not permitted, they were not authorized. And they were not permitted or authorized on purpose. Because the idea was that protest is a right. It is a right that everybody holds, and this is true. And so, you cannot permit a protest because you cannot declare a protest unlawful. Now, there is actually something to that argument. However, that argument was used to excuse massive violence and devastation. And again, after watching this happen for a year, people have had enough. After the Summer of Love and the BLM protests and riots started to die down, we saw the rise of something new. The climate protest. See, there's been a climate change movement for a very, very long time. Oh, and before I get onto the climate protests, let's see. Flame is here. Hello, Flame. Good to see you. Obviously, you were not prepared for this when you walk in. JP is not here. JP is on vacation. You are responsible for bringing your own helmets to these lectures now, okay? You cannot rely on Petty Officer JP to provide. Malachi says, I have first-hand experience with the protests, and yeah, shit got bad fast. Oh, I know. I was not there personally, but I follow the news on a daily basis, and I followed it every single day. I saw all the video, I heard all the reports. I'm glad I was not in them. I live out in the country, okay? Very small town. I live in a small town that is technically About 700 people. And I say technically because I'm pretty sure they're counting chickens in the census. And I was worried here that protests would show up. Malachi says, I was there as a street medic, clearly marked apparel with red crosses, and the cops present when it popped off attacked us first since we helped anyone, we were the enemies. Yeah, I believe that. They were absolutely indiscriminate, which just further went to people distrusting any kind of, or any form of protest. I mean, when you can't even count on the police, then the only protector you have, the only person who's going to deal with it is yourself. And that is a point that I was going to get to later, so just hold on to that one. Anyway, after the whole BLM protest thing died out, we got the climate protests. Now, these were not nearly as violent, usually. There have been a couple, but in general, they haven't been. But what they did is they adopted a new tactic, and what I wanted to show here is I have just a few Google searches. I have here protesters blocking bridges. So this is the Bay Bridge. This is all westbound. Okay, so that's all the Bay Bridge. This is protesters for Israel that are blocking stuff. Yeah, I suppose I should have been more specific in my my searches. But we have people that are blocking bridges here. If I check this one, we have people that are blocking highways. This is amid the APEC conference. This is the sit-in on the Durham Freeway during rush hour, the 101 freeway in LA. There's our lawyer again. Of course, we're going to get him in here. Climate activists block a Dutch highway for the 5th day. If we go to this one, this is just blocking roads. We got a lot of the same stuff here since, you know, they are all technically roads, but this is in Boston calling for a ceasefire. That's an Israel-Palestine thing. This one is irate drivers ram into protesters. We'll get into that one. And one that I don't actually see in here is Burning Man. Nope, there it is. There it is. Protesters block road into Burning Man, and an actual cop cleared this one out. They used a trailer to block the road, and a cop in a 4-wheel drive just rammed it and pushed it out of the road before jumping out and arresting the people blocking the road. This has been something new that we have seen coming up. And let's see. Malachi says, sorry that Grandma needed a granola bar because her sugar was low. So, my bad for carrying water bottles on a hot day. Yeah, well, you should feel bad. Also, Flame says, the music? Meow. The content? Guns, arson, and murder. Well, you have a better suggestion for the music. Should I put on the Doom soundtrack? I can do that. I've got the Doom soundtrack. Malachi also says, on climate, you gotta love the ones tossing the orange paint everywhere, too. That was blocking stuff. Yeah, we'll get to that, too, because I'm just talking about blocking roads right now. So you have all these people. Primarily, it was the climate thing, but now with the war between Israel and Gaza popping off, now you've got this as well. But they're blocking roads again. Now, remember what I said about empathy and compassion. The idea behind the right to protest being, and this is where we're going to get into kind of founding principles. I know we've already talked about this in previous streams, but we're going to talk about it again here. Founding principles. The reason why we have a right to protest is because once upon a time, you did not have a right to protest. That is to say, you have a right to protest. You are free, in any normal situation, to get together with other people and voice your grievances. There is nothing stopping me from getting together with any number of my friends, after I went and got friends, because I don't have friends, but that's okay. You get the idea. But you get together with your friends, your coworkers, your family, whatever it is, and you get together because you have agreements and you try to voice your opinion on it. In a natural, unregulated circumstance, this is something that you can do. You have the right to association. You can go and associate with whoever you want, and if you all choose to associate with each other, that's your right. This is a natural right. We discussed this before. Just like you have the natural right to speech. You can speak. If you're in the middle of the woods, you can speak. You can speak, you can worship. If you want to write things down, you can write things down. If you want to assemble, you can assemble. If you want to petition, you can petition. If you want to protest, you can protest. These are things that you have a natural right to do. It was only in places like, England, ruled by the king, where the idea of protest was not a right. The idea being that if you were trying to protest, the king would dispatch his knights to put the protest down. It would be considered rebellion. And when the US broke away from that, we said, you know what? England has had a lot of rebellions. Ours was just the last. Perhaps, if the king had respected our right to protest, had accepted our petition for representation, maybe things would not have come to this, and we would still be a British colony. But that didn't happen. And so we made sure to enshrine that. But this is also predicated on the idea of civil protest. That is to say, you want to make your voice heard. However, you do this without infringing upon everybody else's rights. You are free to protest. You are free to hold up signs. You are not free, however, to take away from others' free speech in the process, or others' freedom of travel or freedom of assembly at the same time. You cannot take away another person's rights simply to embolden your own rights. Malachi says peaceably assemble, perhaps. Peaceably assemble, peaceably protest, peaceably do anything, civilly do anything. And why do you do this? You do this because of a tacit agreement that we have among each other. This idea of civility. This idea that I will respect your protest if you respect my right to pass. I will respect your protest if you also respect my right to not agree with your protest. And through this mutual understanding and this mutual empathy and compassion, we have a system that can work. But here's the problem. We don't have that anymore. This idea that as a protester, you can sit idly by and just allow people to not acknowledge you or to not hear what you say has become something of an anathema to many of these protesters. And you know what I blame for this? I blame Al Gore for this. Which it may come across and it's like, wait, you blame the vice president? Yeah, it was the vice president. Yeah, I blame Al Gore for this. Why? Because it was Al Gore who wrecked the entire system. No one man has done more damage to Western civilization than he did. Honestly. In terms of some of the worst figures in history, Al Gore may go down in history on the same level as Hitler, Stalin, and Mao. And the reason is an inconvenient truth. When An Inconvenient Truth came out, it was, of course, the talking point of everything. I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember when it came out, because it came out, I believe, at the turn of the millennium. 2000, 2001, something like that. Anyway, it's a big talking point when it came out, because everybody looked at it and everybody went, oh my god, what's happening to the planet? It was the movie that came out and said that climate change was actually going to destroy the world. Not just climate change, though, man-made climate change. It was everything that we were doing that was going to destroy the world. It was our industrialization. It was our transportation. It was our reliance on fossil fuels for things like power generation. Everything that we were doing was going to destroy the world if we did not act now. And it was all bullshit. The problem was, however, that it was bullshit presented in a way that made it seem reasonable, truthful. An Inconvenient Truth was put out there as a documentary. And not only as a documentary, they presented it as such. They had some world-class photographers and videographers who could go through and get all the perfect B-roll they needed, as they talked about how we were literally going to set the world on fire, and we were all going to die choking to death in a carbon dioxide atmosphere. They even went so far as to get scientists, different kinds of research groups, who could put forth data that would agree with everything that was going on in that quote-unquote documentary. And this was the first time that this had really been done in such a public way. Now, the idea of fabricating evidence is not new, and people have been fabricating evidence forever. But it was the first time somebody with his level of influence and with this level of publicity had been done. And when it was presented in a way, especially to a generation that had already been raised, and I remember this one because I am that generation, raised at a generation elementary school where we were all told that the rainforest is being absolutely annihilated, that entire swaths of trees are being turned into barren desert, that every minute 30 species in the world are going extinct forever, that we're dumping toxic waste into the oceans and we're turning them into these sludge-filled pools. I was raised on that. So were many of my classmates, all of my friends, and all of my siblings, my cousins. We were all raised on this. And so when An Inconvenient Truth comes out, well then this must just be them showing us the truth. This is them showing us the actual damage being done. And one of the greatest pictures that was taken during An Inconvenient Truth was the polar bear standing on a little piece of ice in the middle of the great Arctic Ocean. No food, nowhere to lay down, no hope of survival. This polar bear is going to die. And it's because of you. It's because of your car. It's because you get your power from a coal power plant. It's because you use all the plastics. The world is doomed. The problem is, that picture was taken during the summer, when of course there's no ice up there. Or at least there's not as much ice up there. And the polar bear, he's fine. Polar bears can swim. But it didn't matter. The damage was already done. Anybody who was even mildly concerned with the climate saw this and said, the world is going to end. Everything that we've done has been for naught. All these lessons saying, you know, we should teach the children that we want a better future. Yeah, that was a waste of time. It's too late for the easy way, okay? We are well past the carrot point. We are now in the age of the stick. Now let that fester for a couple of decades. And what do we have now? Now we have people like Greta Thunberg who are saying the world is going to die. About 2 years ago, I think. because she said that unless we stopped oil immediately, we were all going to be dead in like 3 years. The planet is going to warm to the point where everything that is made out of wood passes the flashpoint and we literally ignite and turn ourselves into a cinder. Unless we do things now. No more convincing people, no more discussion. The people must be shown the error of their ways. And we must do it whether they understand it or not. If they're going to behave like children, we must treat them like children. And sometimes a child needs to have their hands slapped, their toys taken away, and grounded to their room, because we know what's better for them. This became the new face of the climate change movement. Now, the idea of eco-terrorism is not new. We have had eco-terrorism since the 70s in most of the Western world, but now it had gone mainstream. And so the protesters said, we're going to start destroying everything that is going to be destroying the planet. That means if you're driving a car, we will destroy your car. If there is a power plant, we will destroy the power plant. And if the highways are what's encouraging people to use their cars, then we will destroy the highways or at least render them unusable. And by stopping people from doing the things that are going to destroy the planet, we will save the planet, not just for ourselves, but for them too. And at the end of the day, they will drop to their knees, kiss our feet, and thank us for doing the things that they were unable to do themselves. This is the modern idea of the climate protester. And this is what they have done. Surely you have seen the pictures of climate protesters blocking roads. As was mentioned, I believe it was mentioned earlier, we've also seen climate protesters going after things like museums. Because you have groups like Just Stop Oil, who literally mean all oil, including oil paints. Which I think is absolutely hilarious, because the idea of oil paints goes back before we understood petroleum. It's not black crude oil in oil paint. However, we're not dealing with very smart people here. But we have cases of people who are going into museums and they're destroying pieces of artwork, and then they're saying, we need to just stop oil. We have protesters who are blocking off bridges and highways, saying we need to just stop, things like oil. We need to stop cars. And as I said before, and I will continue to use her as a punching bag, we have people like Greta Thunberg, who say that we have to shut down all industrialization in the world, so long as it comes from a non-green source. And by the way, since nuclear is not considered a green source of energy anymore, that means that we are talking about only solar and geothermal energy. Now, just as a little bit of an aside, I did some research last week when I was thinking about this, and I was, starting to write my notes for this lecture. Did you know that green energy, that is solar, wind, geothermal, accounts for about 4.5, let's round up generously and call it 5% of all energy generated on Earth? Okay, that's it. Now, why is this important? To truly grasp how important this is, let's understand what energy is. Energy is the ability to do work. That means that if you want your dog to do work, you want your horse to do work, you must give it energy. This energy usually comes in the form of food. And food is an excellent way to explain this, because food and coal are both energy. We eat food to gain energy. We burn coal to gain energy. They're both essentially the same thing. Also, I have chat. Let's see. Malachi says, the world won't die. People may die off, but Earth, Mama's fine. She'll shake us off like a tick and recover in her own time. That is absolutely true. Tux is in the chat. Hello, Tux. Hi, Cat. Woke up. It's okay. You slept in. Saturday. Also, people who don't think nuclear is clean are dumb. Or they have an agenda. Or there are a few bulldozers in this conversation. Or also there are fewer bulldozers in this conversation than I expected. That's because you're late. We had lots of bulldozers earlier. You have to show up on time for these things. And Flame says, pretty sure newer nuclear reactors are even cleaner and more efficient. They are, actually. However, nuclear power has always been clean and efficient, even the older reactors. Here's an interesting thing that most people don't know. Here's a little bit of trivia for you. Chernobyl. Everybody knows about Chernobyl because of the reactor that exploded. But did you know that Chernobyl was still generating power all the way up until, like, I think it was 2018, 2020, something like that? It was reactor number 5, I believe, that blew up. Reactor number 5 of 5. Reactors 1 through 4 continued to generate power for decades afterwards. And by the way, those old Soviet reactors, while they were not the best reactors, were still incredibly clean. Yes, nuclear has always been clean, and they only get better with time. Anyway, back to energy. Now, one of the things that they talk about when they talk about, stopping every source of energy that's not green, I want to talk about food. Let's talk about rabbits, because I love bunnies. Bunnies are adorable. They're like my favorite thing ever. I love bunnies. If I take a family of bunnies, okay? So I have at least one breeding pair of bunnies, and I set them loose in a field, what's going to happen over time? You know what's going to happen over time. They're going to breed. Okay? And they will breed and breed and breed and breed so long as there is food there for them to eat. Okay? Now, eventually, they will run out of food, and the population will die off. And then, after the population, or the excess population dies off, the population will stabilize to a level that the meadow can sustain. Okay? So if there is enough food in the meadow to sustain 100 bunnies, over time, you will get an average of 100 bunnies. Now, if I introduce, say, a predator into there, like, say, a weasel, okay? Maybe a breeding pair of weasels. Of course, we will have the weasels who will start killing bunnies. And they will eat the bunnies. And eventually, these things will fall into the same equilibrium, okay? There'll be a population spike of weasels, a population crash of bunnies, which will cause a population crash of weasels, and then they will equalize, and there will be enough grass to feed the bunnies, and enough bunnies to feed the weasels, and there will always be just a few weasels, more bunnies, and more grass. This is natural equilibrium. Because the energy supplied in the system can only support so much. Now, if I were to increase the amount of grass by making this meadow larger, more grass means more bunnies. More bunnies means more weasels. By adding more energy into the system, we can increase the populations. What would happen then if I took away the grass? Well, obviously, by taking away the grass, we take away the available energy in the system, and everything else will become equivalent. This is important because we humans, as much as we might like to think so, are not exempt from this system. We also live in a system that is keenly dependent on how much energy we have. For us, it's not just food. We use all of the energy we have available to live. We need things like fossil fuel energy to run tractors and combines and trucks and everything else to both sow, reap, and transport our food. We need things like heating and air conditioning, which lets us exist in climates that would otherwise be unhospitable. We have distribution networks. That means that we have access to things like clothing and tools that we otherwise might not be available to have. And we have medicines and medical care that we might not otherwise have access to because we have the development we have medicine, we have doctors, we have all this stuff. You get it. Point is, all of this stuff takes energy. Okay? If we wanted to have it, then we have to have the energy to supply it. Which means that we, as a population, exist in this system. And we only exist in this system because there is enough energy in the system to sustain us. If there wasn't, then we wouldn't survive. Now here's the real kicker. And let's see, Malachi says, I love the rocks that have auras and uranium especially. Specifically pitch blend. Just so happens to give off an F off and die aura that is particularly my favorite. I don't know. However, I will say this. One of my bucket list goals in my life, and I don't know how I'm going to achieve it, but I need to achieve it somehow. I need to see Cherenkov radiation. I need to. And I don't mean through a monitor. I don't mean to go watch a video on YouTube. I need to see it with my own one working eye. I don't know how I'm going to pull it off or where I'm going to pull it off, but that is one of the things that I need to do before I die. Also, Flame says, the Combine? No, no, no. We're not doing that yet. The 7 Hours War has not happened yet. However, I have to leave that as a yet. I cannot prove that it won't happen. And Malka says, the blue flash. It's not a blue flash, it's a blue glow. It's a blue glow once the reactor gets going. Anyway, though, back to talking about human populations. So, as I stated before, green energy accounts for about 5%, if we're being generous, of all of the energy generated on the planet. And when I say all the energy, I'm talking coal plants, trash plants, oil plants, reactors, all of it. And groups like Just Stop Oil or, people like Greta Thunberg want to shut it all down. Well, now we're back talking about populations and energy. Because if we do shut it all down, if we just tomorrow agreed we will shut down every single machine and system that does not run on green energy, we will be removing 95% of all of the energy from our system. And what happens then? Just like if I were to remove half of the grass from the meadow, which would then remove half of the bunnies from the meadow, which would then remove half of the weasels from the meadow, if we remove 95% of all of the energy generated in the world, it will remove 95% of the population from the world. And you may think about that and you may say, well, how is that going to, how is that going to remove 95% of the population? I've been through a power outage before. Power was out for a week once. I survived. It's like, yes, you did survive. Think about this. First things first, we shut down all the power. Now, anybody who does not have a solar panel, a windmill, or access to a geothermal vent, no power. That means that hospitals, which, by the way, if the power goes out, rely on diesel generators, no diesel, anybody who's on life support of any kind is dead. Or anybody who relies on any kind of machine, such as a dialysis patient, is dead. Anybody who relies on something like a pacemaker has until the battery wears out, and then they're dead. Okay? And anybody who requires any kind of, technology inside that hospital to get their treatment, we're talking any kind of imaging or anything like that, yeah, they're gone too. So immediately, anybody who had any kind of terminal reliance on energy and technology, gone. Next up, because we have no power, we also have no refrigeration. That means that anybody who was reliant on things like insulin are gone within the month. Some people may find a way to survive, especially if they're like a type 2 diabetic, but anybody who is type 1, no, they're gone. Type 1 diabetes is essentially going to eradicate itself because type 1 diabetics will not be able to survive. But at the same time, if we lose refrigeration, we also lose food storage. Tell me, where are you sourcing your food without a refrigerator to store it in? Yes, root cellars are a thing. How many people have a root cellar anymore? Most people don't. Very few people do anymore, in fact. The vast majority of people don't have anywhere or any way to store food. You're not getting any of it. But it doesn't matter, really, because there's not going to be any food for you to get. We're now back to basically harvesting everything by either hand or animal power, and even once we've harvested it by animal power, there is no way to transport it the hundreds or thousands of miles to get it from the farm to you. And so, by the end of the month, we will have mass starvation. And when I say mass starvation, I mean hitherto levels that have never been seen on this planet since, I don't know, the extinction of the dinosaurs. We are talking about, what was it called? It was the Cambrian explosion, and then it was what was the crash? I don't remember. At any rate, we had the Cambrian explosion, which resulted in an explosion of life on the planet, and then almost immediately afterwards, like 95% of all life on the planet died off. I believe it was because almost all life on the planet was literally breathing carbon dioxide and exhaling oxygen. And because of the explosion of life, just like I talked about with the explosion of the rabbit population, they literally filled the entire atmosphere with oxygen that they could not process. And so pretty much all life on Earth suffocated, except for the few organisms that were actually capable of breathing oxygen. So anyway, that's what would happen. There would be mass extinctions across the entire planet, although primarily just human extinctions, although all of our livestock would also go. Because all these farms that have to import things like, hay, straw, corn, whatever it is to keep their populations fed, yeah, those animals aren't getting fed either. So they're all going to die too. Guess what? That's less food in the system. I go on this very, very long diatribe to talk about what these climate protesters are arguing for. Every single time they block a bridge, or they block the highways, or they just block the roads in your town. And the thing is that most normal people understand this, especially if they're an adult and they've had a decent education. Most adults understand that if you want to buy food from your store, if you want to get, hamburger, If you want to have hamburgers tonight, you go to the store to buy it. The store buys it from probably a processing company. That processing company will get its meat from an industrial butcher. That butcher will get its meat, its livestock, from a farm. And so if there's no farms, if there's no energy, if there's no transportation, then there's no food at the store, and you don't eat. Most normal people understand this. However, we have a generation of people who have not been taught these things. The number of videos that I have seen where people are asked, where does the food come from? And they just say the store. And then they don't know anything further than that is truly horrifying. And we talk about the people who are protesting in the streets, it's primarily them. These people who think that the systems are in place and they just work. Well, they do just work, but they work because of things like energy. And so we, as rational thinking people, get caught in these protests, in these backups and everything else because the roads are closed. And all of us know this is stupid. This is wrong. And here's the thing. Even if we wanted to have a conversation, we can't. Because we're dealing with people who have decided that civility, empathy, and compassion are no longer on the table. And let's see. Malachi says, I've got a decent basement that has an old side room, and I could use that as storage, but I'd have to stop the water intrusion. Here's the thing, though. Does it get cold? That's the thing about root cellars. Root cellars have to go into the ground. They have to go far enough into the ground, usually to the frost line. Because that's the point where you want to keep it. You want to try and keep your stuff roughly at that frost line so that you're keeping things cold enough not to spoil. But not everyone has access to that. For example, where I live, I'm in Pennsylvania. I'm not going to tell you where in Pennsylvania, I'm not that dumb, but what I will say is the area here is mostly stone. Like, you can find... there's dirt everywhere, obviously, but if you dig down a little bit, you hit stone. And so, root cellars around here, not very common. You would have to, like, actually mine out a place to put in that kind of thing. Flame says, just replace coal energy with atomic energy. I wish we would. I do. I wish we would. I actually saw a plan for small nuclear reactors. Like, the idea of a nuclear reactor is not complicated. You take the spicy rocks and you put them in the bucket of water, and when the water gets hot, you use the hot water to spin the sticky rocks inside the coil of metal, and that makes power. Somehow. It's magic. We don't really understand how that works, but the spicy rocks make hot water, and the sticky rocks in the metal ring make power. And believe it or not, that doesn't actually require a lot of space. I have seen designs for cities where instead of having one giant nuclear plant, you could actually have a nuclear plant the size of a block that almost only supplies power to its extended neighborhood. So we're talking about one block-sized nuclear reactor that would service an area of about, I don't know, 10 blocks in each direction. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, I'm not sure. But the idea being that you build like your entire neighborhood around the power source. And now, not only do you have this cheap green power, but you can have a distributed power network too. Now, the best argument against that, and it is a really good argument, is that nuclear reactors actually become more efficient, the larger they are. The smaller you get, the more you got to change out the fuel in it. And so that's a really good reason to not do that. But if we can find a way around that, or if it's actually within tolerances, it's an idea. Flame also says, mother effers think that food just refills in the stores like in video games. They do. Some of them actually do. Because when you ask them about it, they just say, well, the food just comes in the truck. And then you say, well, where does the food in the truck come from? And they just shrug. I don't know. Yeah, that's right. You don't know. That's the problem. Malachi says, hilariously, also their road blockages are crap too. It's like, congratulations, you blocked the road. Now, how many cars are out there being used for extra time, just idling, spewing exhaust because of you? Okay. Everybody makes that argument. But what you have to understand is, it's a short-term loss for long-term gains. Because here's how this works. Yes, the cars that are just idling are producing more exhaust. But if you are inconvenienced enough, okay? If you're inconvenienced enough, then maybe the next time you need to go somewhere, you might rethink taking your car. Because what happens if you get stuck in another protest? And then you have to idle there for more time again. All of that gas that you're burning is going to cost you money. You don't want to get caught in another protest and spend more money, do you? Okay? And let's not ignore the time. We saw the article. There was a protest in the Dutch. That would be Holland? Holland is the Dutch, right? I believe that's it. That they stopped the road for 5 days. Could you imagine if your car was stuck there for 5 days? What this is, I mean, you say that you get it, it's inconvenient, but it's more than just inconvenient. Again, the inconvenience is kind of it's kind of just a symptom of a larger problem. It's not that you're being inconvenienced, it's they want you to be afraid of being inconvenienced. They want you to be afraid to get in your car and go out, because if you get in your car and go out, you might get stopped for another 8 hours in a traffic jam. You might have to burn up another $80 worth of gasoline. It's not the inconvenience they want. It's the fear of the inconvenience. And that is where we get to the real crux of the matter here. Because what they're doing is they want to make you fearful to go outside. They want to make you fearful to get in your car, to go anywhere. They want to make you fearful of not taking the train. Because, I mean, the train's not going to be protested, right? You know, until somebody actually does protest the train, which they are doing. They want to make you fearful. And we go back to what we talked about, and Tux hits the nail right on the head. If somebody is inconvenienced, then somebody might... Well, never mind. Except that we're not going to never mind. We're going to get to that right now. See, the idea of compassion for the rest of the world has gone out. Okay? This idea of being civil towards those people who you now regard as being uncivil has gone out the window. This idea of being, and I'm going to use their own words for this one, tolerant of the intolerant. They're not doing that anymore. They are done being ignored. They are done standing on the sidelines. And if people will not do the right thing for their own good, then they will be forced to do the right thing for their own good. And we will continue to force them to do the right thing for their own good until they either realize that it's their own good and they do it on their own, or they become too afraid to do anything else. However, there is another side to that. Because now, if the protesters are going to drop all civility, and they are going to force the rest of the world to do as they say, the rest of the world might just push back. And now we come to the absolute crux of what I want to talk about today. See, this is a symptom of a larger problem. And we talk about protests. We have so many protests going on right now. The BLM protests have mostly died out, but they haven't stopped entirely. You can still find them in some places. Climate protests, as I just established, are everywhere. As we saw in some of these, well, we're even seeing protests over the Israel and the Palestine thing, or Israel and Gaza, excuse me. We're also seeing protests over migrants in places like New York City, in places like Chicago, where people are literally marching in the street demanding that the city do for migrants, while you have other people who live in the city saying that they need to take care of the city first. And how do they do that? Well, they go through and they make life either inconvenient or they just simply stop it for everybody else. They will shut down the streets. They will shut down buildings. And they want to do this to make people afraid of disagreeing with them. If you don't want your life to be interrupted and put on hold, or if you don't want your life ended entirely and permanently, then you will do as the protesters say. This is where we're at right now. This is the modern form of protest. And it puts us all in a very inconvenient position. Because now we are in a position where, what do we do about it? As we saw here, people are divided. Which side do you fall on? Let me know down in the chat. Which side do you fall on? Are you on the side of the protesters who, because they see what's being done in Panama, because they believe that this is going to ruin their environment and, you know, it's also going to add to the added devastation of the planet that is going to kill us all, that they are justified in shutting down highways and making life as difficult to live for everyone else because they have the moral high ground, and if they don't do it, then we all suffer the consequences of these actions? Or are you on the side of the lawyer who finally, after being stopped by all of these protests, after seeing other people being taken from their cars, beaten up, having their cars taken, having entire roadways shut down or put out of commission, that finally he said enough and he said, I am going to end this now. And he shot 2 people, killed them on sight, and took care of the problem that nobody else would take care of. Removing the barricade, removing the blockage in the road, and letting traffic resume again so that everybody backed up in that line can get back to their normal lives. Which side do you fall on? And which side is right? Is there a right side? Because the unfortunate part of this is, there is no right side to this, really. And unfortunately, in order to fix this, there's only really one of 2 options. Number 1, and by far the best one, is we need to take a look at our culture and determine what is wrong with our culture. Why is it that people now believe that they are they're at the point where they must either inconvenience or end somebody else's life or else we are all going to be irrevocably damaged. Or on the other side, where we determine that we all have the right to protest, however, some protest is going to have to be banned or removed. It puts us in a very interesting and very unenviable place. As they say, we cannot tolerate the intolerant. But if you do not tolerate the intolerant, are you really being tolerant? This is a nuance that at one point in time, we could actually sit down and discuss. But as I said, culture. We no longer have a generation that has been educated to the point that it is capable of having those discussions. We've slacked on that. Yeah, and let's see. Flame said, I think I wouldn't want to take a side. Both sides have solid points. The problem is, Flame, you and many people like you are very quickly running out of fence to sit on. I've known a lot of people who were fence sitters, and they say, you know what? I'm not involved. I don't want to be involved. I can understand both sides, and I think that both sides are valid. The unfortunate part for you is that sooner or later, one side is going to force you to pick a side. Because one side is going to declare that you are either with us or you are against us. And we see that everywhere right now. We can see that very, very clearly in the Israel versus Gaza conflict, where you have both sides pointing at the other and saying it's their fault. And all of the people in the middle are being told that if you're not with me, you're with them. And I will not tolerate anybody who is not with me. The decision will be made for you if you do not make the decision yourself. It's as the old axiom says, you don't have to care about politics, but politics will care about you. And if you do not control politics, politics will control you. So you will have to pick a side at some point. I'm not going to force you. But someday somebody else will. This is where principles, morals, and virtues come in. You need to find your principles, morals, and virtues. And then you need to stand by them. And that will help guide you as to which side you think is right. Malachi says, so the right to protest was lost when they infringed on the right to travel, but the right to travel does not grant you the right to take a life, so they're all wrong. And you are right about that. But here is the kicker in that. He did not have the right to take a life. It was not his responsibility. Whose responsibility was it, though? Because this is where we get back to the cultural issue. When I talk about people who are not being raised and educated in a way to take responsibility for this stuff, or to even discuss it. Because if these people impeded the right to travel, what should have happened? The police should have come out and arrested them. See, this is what peaceful protest used to be. You would go out and you would protest, and you would either be a peaceful protester or you would engage in what they called civil disobedience. Which, yes, could be blocking a road, or it could be blocking a doorway or an entrance to something. You would do something that you knew was illegal, and you would be willing to be arrested for it. Because in being arrested for it and in suffering for your cause, you would make people more more sympathetic to your cause. This is the same reason why Gandhi was so very influential. The fact that he was willing to suffer for his cause. In that case, it was hunger strikes and things of that nature. But now, nobody's willing to suffer for their own cause. Instead, they're interested in making you suffer for their cause. That's one part of it. The other part of it, however, is that those people whose responsibility it is to maintain order are derelict in their duties. This roadblock here in Panama should have been taken down by the police. Everybody who was there should have been arrested for blocking the road. They should have been charged for a public disobedience thing. Public nuisance. They should have been charged, it should have gone on their record, and then they should have been released. Because disorderly conduct is not usually something you spend a lot of time in jail for. At least in the US. Now granted, this isn't Panama. Their laws are different, and I wouldn't trust them at all. But you should be willing to face the consequences of your actions. Now, in this case, if the police were not going to come out and deal with it, somebody was going to have to. Either they would have to completely acquiesce to what the protesters wanted, which nobody who was stuck on the road actually had the ability to do. The protesters in the road wanted to have the copper mine shut down. There is nobody in that road who has the ability to shut down the copper mine. And so already you're off to a bad start. Because you are inconveniencing the wrong people. Number 2, it should have been cleared up by the police, but if the police aren't going to do it, then all those people that you're going to be inconveniencing, they're going to have to do something to fix it. And since they can't fix the copper mine, they're going to have to deal with the problem directly in front of them. Which is exactly what happened. And what happened? 2 people were shot, and the road was reopened. The problem has been solved. Was it solved in the right way? No. But what other options were there besides do nothing? Malachi says, on the side taking, in this case, I'd have to sit with the protesters because they didn't infringe, that stupid heart's in the way. They didn't infringe on the man's right to continue living. And this is true. And you are absolutely welcome to hold that belief. I would, however, just implore you to understand the other side. And at the same time, neither one of these outcomes was good. Whether they had lived and the roadblock continued would have still been bad. So we have 2 problems symptomatic of a larger problem. That is, we are not a civilized society anymore. And if we want to solve anything, we need to go back to that. Now, before I sign off of here today, because I want to get out of here before the hour, and that's in about 10 minutes, I do want to go back up to what Malachi said at the very beginning of this, when Malachi brought up the idea of school shootings. And I said, school shootings, concert shootings, clubs, whatever it is. It also comes back to the same cultural issue, because we can look at people who go into a school and shoot the school up and say, okay, why did they do that? I mean, a lot of people want to immediately jump to the guns and say, well, this is the reason why we need to get rid of all the guns. And it's like, okay. Most people don't really know how to do this. But most households have all the chemicals needed to create weapons of mass destruction inside of them already. And I mean, I will tell you one right now, right out the gate. A very easy one. One that actually kills people every single year. Ammonia and bleach. See, if you actually read those bottles, they will both tell you, do not mix ammonia and bleach. The reason being, people will mix them together because both ammonia and bleach are cleaning products. And they think that if you put them both together, it'll clean extra good. And while, yes, it will get the ring off of the tub and it will scrub the hell out of your oven, ammonia and bleach together create, it's ammonium chloride, I think? Ammonium chloride gas? I think. I'm not sure on this one. I'm not good at chemistry. Either way, it creates a gas that is incredibly toxic, and yes, it kills people every single year. Because they mix the two in a bucket, they go to work scrubbing the bathroom, maybe they close the door while they're working, and they end up gassing themselves. Now, these are two chemicals that everybody has, and if you were to mix them in like a public place, you could do a lot of damage with that. So blaming the gun for what's happening is not the problem, okay? They could do the same thing, just mixing a whole bunch of bleach and ammonia together. Or there's other more spicy combinations of chemicals you could put together. The point is, the tools are already there, and we've already seen this in places like England, where they said, you know, we're going to ban guns because guns are the problem, and then they saw a massive drop in gun crime and a massive spike in knife crime and other tools. Not just knives, but also things like hammers or screwdrivers. Anything to hurt another person. The problem is never the tools. The problem is the culture. The problem is, why are we not being civil to each other anymore? What happened to the morals and values of civility? An interesting thing I heard the other day when somebody was talking about abortion. I wish I remembered the person who said it. They said abortion should not be illegal. They said that abortion should be unconscionable. You shouldn't need to make it illegal because nobody should even be able to form the thought of an abortion. They should immediately think that and say, oh God, what a monstrous thing that I just thought of. And while the abortion argument is one that we can have, and I'm not going to get into here, the same thing is true when we talk about people, say, blocking a road. That shouldn't be necessarily illegal, even though it already is. It should be unconscionable. Why would you do that? Why would you want to go out and punish an entire swath of the population whom you don't even know? You have no issues with? At least I presume you have no issues with, unless your issue is with the population as a whole. When it comes to things like, you know, school shootings, they're already illegal. Murder is already illegal. It should be unconscionable. What drove a person to do this? The problem is cultural. The problem is moral. And that's the real heart of it. When we go back and we look at Marvin Haymeyer and his rampage through Granby, Colorado. Yeah, Colorado. Well, I mean, it's close enough to California at this point. Colorado. We should look at both sides of this and say, everything that everybody did here was unconscionable. There were numerous off-ramps everywhere in this story. But nobody took one. Nobody wanted to take one. They did things intentionally to hurt other people until it escalated to the killdozer. In this case, it should have been unconscionable for them to block the road. It should have been unconscionable for him to shoot people. But instead, we passed that. We passed that a long time ago. And in all of these cases, these should have all been unconscionable. But where are the morals? Where are the values? Where is anybody to say that what we're doing is wrong? They don't think it's wrong. And they don't think it's wrong because we don't have shared values anymore. They have their values. We have our values. And they're not compatible. We need to find common culture again before we can make any progress on fixing the rest of these problems. And until then, we are going to find ourselves constantly in a civilization of seemingly reasonable people who excuse everything they're doing as simply unreasonable actions for an unreasonable problem. And so long as we continue to use that excuse, we will never make any kind of progress. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to leave things off there before I run too much later and I run over time. I hope I made my point there clear enough. I know, I tend to ramble a little bit, but there was a lot of explanations in there, a lot of tangents that we had to go down. But I like to try and use these to find the actual root causes of the problems we're looking for, because only after we've identified the problems can we start working on the solutions. So, I'm going to leave that there. Hopefully I've given you something to think about, maybe something to kind of meditate on, reflect on, whatever that happens to be. Something you found of value in this at least. Besides Malachi and Tuxedo trying to kill each other in the chat. I'm not getting involved in this. I'm not going to do it. If you want, however, I will recommend you the Harbinger guy who was in John Wick 4, okay? He seemed pretty cool. He can do your duel for you. But I'm going to leave that alone. I'm not getting involved any further. Just a recommendation. Let's see. Next week, well, let's see. This week is Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is not going to affect too much. I will still have another lecture on Saturday. So that's not going to change. I don't know if anyone's actually going to come to it or not, or if everyone's going to be out trying to get the best small business Saturday, isn't it? Yeah, the best small business Saturday deals they can. So I'll leave you to that one. If you come, great. If not, don't know. Tomorrow, of course, is the tabletop stream. So if you want to get on that, just show up. Same time as this one. It's just on Sunday, not Saturday. And we're going to have fun with that one. We're going to be making Kroot. Kroot and bugs. It's going to be weird. I don't know. So, thank you for coming to this lecture. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel. If you haven't done so already, hit the bell icon. If you know somebody else who could also maybe use a listen to this discussion, maybe they might get something out of it, share this video with them afterwards. And otherwise, if you're like me or you like the things that I talk about, leave a like on the stream. If you got your own thoughts to share afterwards, there's a comment section down below. Leave comments there. If you want to yell at me directly, then you can do that. All you gotta do is join the Discord, and there you can ping me all day, at least until I, turn off pinging for you. But you can still yell at me there all you want. It's okay. Just talk to Tux. He'll get everyone together for you, or he'll get everyone together and you can all yell at me collectively. So, do that. I will see you either in the next stream, or tomorrow's stream, or the Discord. And till then, take care.